there, and welcome back. I trust that you have completed the back of the sweater and it measures the correct measurement for the size you're making. It doesn't matter which row you actually end on for this next part. It just matters that the distance from the leash slit to the point of the sweater where you are right now is the measurement you need. I need 9 inches, which is exactly what I have, so I am ready to move on to the next step. You'll also notice when you look at the instructions for the back end shaping, this is the back end. So this would be the head of the dog, this is the body, and now we're going back here to the back end where the tail is. It doesn't matter if you end on a right side or a wrong side. The next several sets of rows, what we will be doing is decrease stitches at the beginning of each row as we go along. And by decreasing these stitches using a bind off, we are going to get down to where the back end of the sweater is actually tapered and it will look nice and neat. Now, you'll also notice, as I mentioned before, that for each size there is a different set of instructions. That's because the instructions differ depending on how many stitches you have, and then you have to bind off according to the number of stitches you have. The good news is, even though I'm going to be using the extra small pattern, I will show you how to bind off these stitches at the beginning of these rows, and you'll be able to apply that to either the small, medium, or large sizes. It really doesn't matter. It's all going to be done the same. Just follow along with your pattern, and when it says to bind off X number of stitches, you will do that. So I'm going to go ahead, maintain the same stitch pattern I have been going on with here, but we will begin by binding off stitches. So for me, I'm getting ready to move on to the next step, which is, let's see, I'm going from pink, I'm going to go to green. So I have to pick up my color C and bring it up here. Let's get everything going. And I will begin with my bind off. So I start off, I will knit 1, knit 2, have the back stitch jump up and over that front stitch and off. So that's 1 stitch bound off, knit the next stitch, have the back stitch jump up and over that front stitch. I've now just bound off 2 stitches, and I will carry on in pattern for the rest of this row. This just so happens to be a plain knit row, so I will knit to the end of this row. I'm at the end of the row, so all I need to do is turn my work, make sure I maintain the same stitch pattern that we've been doing all along. By now, you probably don't even have to look at your pattern because you've worked so many rows of this particular stitch pattern. You know where you are. So I am on another knit row, and I have to bind off 2 stitches at the start of this row. I want to remind you, if you're doing one of the other sizes, you might have a different number of stitches to bind off throughout the entire section that I'm doing right now. So make sure you're following along with the instructions for your size. For me, I am going to bind off 2 stitches. So I have to start off with my purl 1 because I'm keeping that edge in stockinette. And then I will knit 1. Have the back stitch jump the front stitch. Knit 1 more. Back stitch jumps the front stitch, and then I continue on with my pattern until I get to the end of this row. I'm coming to the end of my row 2, and you'll notice that we have those 2 stitches bound off, so I have fewer stitches. I turn my work, and I would carry on once again in the same stitch pattern I've been using on the body, but for rows 3 and 4, I continue doing the same thing I just did. I will bind off 2 stitches at the start of both rows 3 and 4. Now, for me, binding off on rows 3 and 4 is going to be a little bit different than what I just did here, because the last 2 rows I completed were just knitting rows. Now we're going to be working into the slip stitch rows as well. So let's see how we bind off when we're working into the rows where we begin our slip stitches. All right, so I'm back to my color A. See if I can move that so you can see a little bit better. And I've got to bind off the first 2 stitches. So I'll go ahead and I'm just going to treat them as if they are knits. So I'm going to knit 2, have the back one jump the front one, knit one more, have the back one jump the front one. Now I'm going to count this stitch right here on my needle as my first knit stitch when I will now jump into my pattern. So I will slip a stitch, knit a stitch, slip a stitch, knit a stitch. One way to check this is look at your slip stitches from previous rows. You'll know they're all stacked on each other. Make sure the slip stitches you are working now that you've decreased 2 stitches are on top of the previous slip stitch rows as well. Mine are, which is perfect. So I'm going to repeat my stitch pattern repeat all the way down this row. If you've done everything correctly, you will end in pattern. Go ahead, rotate your work and continue on with the pattern following the next row you're supposed to do and bind off the number of stitches you need to bind off on this row. I'm on my wrong side, so I will start off with my purl one. And then I will go ahead and keep in the purl stitch pattern because that's what I'm working here. So I purled one more. Have the back one jump the front, and then I'll purl the next. Have the back jump the front. Once again, the stitch on my right hand needle counts as my first stitch, my first purl, and I'm ready to jump into my pattern sequence, which is slip one, purl one, slip one, purl one. Okay, I really feel like you're able to complete this next set of instructions with what I just showed you. Just some things to remember. You're going to be binding off stitches every single row. So make sure you take a look at the pattern and follow along with the size you're making. As you bind off those stitches, you do need to also keep those first and last stitches in stockinette, which means on the right side, you keep those as knits, on the wrong side, you keep those as purls. Along with that, you have to maintain the slip stitch stripes pattern as you're binding off the stitches. If you get off track, all you have to do is find the slip stitches on the sweater you've already done and just make sure you're lining up the slip stitches in the new sections you're creating. That way nothing gets off track. The last thing is, as you're doing these bind offs, I found that I did like to cut the yarn and rejoin after the bind off so I didn't get a really super long float. If you want to do that, you absolutely can do that. That just means you have a couple more ends to weave in, but it's not so difficult. Which brings me to the very last part. Once you complete this section, I want you to take your bent tip tapestry needle and weave in those ends. Get rid of them all so that way you don't have to worry about them as we're doing the seaming. After you do that, we can jump in and begin the seaming section. I have gone ahead and I've woven in all of my ends because I did cut my ends down here when I was moving with these bind off stitches. So I got all those woven in. I wove in the stitches here at the very start. And this is the right side of my sweater as it is. You can see my contrasting colored yarn right there. That's where the front leg opening is for the sweater. And now what I want to do is turn my sweater with the turn my sweater around, and I will actually be folding this up so that way the right side of the sweater is facing me. And starting down here at the ribbing portion, I am going to use a mattress stitch and seam the ribbing together, and then I will seam this increase section together, and then I will seam this straight edge together all the way down to the point at which I started to do my decreases. What you need to do now is grab a length of yarn that you think is long enough to get through all of that seaming. Put that length of yarn on your bent tip tapestry needle. It's the same one you used when you were weaving in ends, and we can get started with the mattress stitch. As I mentioned, we want to have the right side of the fabric facing me, and that's as it's folded, I'm looking at the right side. And you can start down here at the bottom portion, but the instructions say to start up here at the ribbing portion, so that's where we will begin. I'm using my color A to seam the sweater together just because I thought that would look nice. And I will join my color A with a figure 8. So I'm coming down here and I'm putting my tapestry needle through one stitch on my right side. And it doesn't matter if you start on the right side or left side. I'm going to leave enough tail that I can weave in later. Come to the corresponding stitch on the opposite side and go from bottom to top. Pull through. Okay, and when I come back over here, going the same direction through the same stitch, I'm essentially getting a figure 8. Can you see that figure 8? So when I pull the tail together, that adds, my yarn is attached, everything's ready. Now to do the mattress stitch on this portion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work up along the edge right here where the pearls are. So I am going to go in and go underneath 2 purl bumps and then pull up. Come over here to the corresponding side, go underneath 2 purl bumps and pull up. Go underneath 2 purl bumps, make sure you're getting your purl bumps, and pull up. Back and forth. We're going to do this back and forth. This is the mattress stitch. If you wanted to do a whip stitch because you really don't care if it has a really nice seam together or not, you can absolutely do a whip stitch, a single crochet join, a slip stitch join, any sort of join you want to do. But I felt like this was a good time to show how to do the mattress stitch. Now you'll notice I'm not really pulling these really tight as of yet. And that is just because I think it's so fun to hold the tail and then give a pull on the yarn that I'm seaming and watching those stitches get pulled together. So I will do this all the way up this ribbing section. When the ribbing section is all pulled together, it's now time to match up the increase edge. Now, we kept these edge stitches in stockinette, and this is why we did it. It should make it easier for us to go ahead and seam our work, following along that stockinette edge. So you want to go ahead and work your mattress stitch down the stockinette stitch edge. As you're working along with the mattress stitch, you should be able to notice that your colors are matching up from the start of the row to the end of the row. And that should help you out a little bit as far as knowing where to put your needle in and so on and so forth from one side to the opposite side, because it's going to be the same. If I went in through the orange and the pink over there, see how I have the colors matching up the best I can. So I've just gone through all of my increase section, and now I'm on essentially the straightaway. So I just need to seam this up all the way down to where I started my bind off. So I'm going to continue on working the mattress stitch all the way down these edge stitches. When you get to the end, everything should be matched up pretty good as you can get, right? And when you get to the end, go ahead and finish off with the same type of figure 8 you began with. So I am going to do that right here. See my figure 8? And if I give it a good pull, here we are. So if I flip my thing just like so, flip the sweater, I can actually take my end and weave it in at this time. And I can put it right through that big seam that I have, just so that it's already woven in and out of the way. Once you've tucked that into that really nice seam, go ahead and snip it off. And then the last thing you need to do is weave in the beginning tail of that seam. So the same way, you can just tuck that tail right into this really great seam you have up here at the ribbing portion, and it'll just be done and out of the way. Once that's all tucked in, you can give that a snip. Okay, so now I have a sweater that is almost done, right? So this is the back of the sweater. Here's my leash opening. Here's the back of the sweater. If I turn it around, I still have to deal with the area for the legs. But before I start on those legs, I want to deal with the back edging. Let's take a look at this back portion here. So as you can see, you kind of get an orientation of where I am. I have the right side of the sweater facing me, and we have all of these bind off stitches that we want to deal with. So the instructions want us to have the right side facing us, and we will begin right here at the seam portion. And this is where we bring in our circular needles. So make sure you have your circular needles and your color A. So with your color A, starting at this back seam, you are going to pick up and knit the number of stitches that you need to pick up and knit for the size you're making. That is written in the pattern. So make sure you pull out your pattern and see how many stitches you need to pick up and knit. To pick up and knit stitches, all you need to do is literally take your needle, stick it into the edge, and to start off here, I'm just going to yarn over with my color A, and then pull that color A back through that edge stitch. Go along the edge. I'm just going to go as evenly spaced as possible and try and pick up the number of stitches that is written in the pattern. If you find that you need to pick up 1 or 2 more stitches, that is okay. Just try and maintain an even number of stitches as you go along. And you'll notice sometimes, like on these bind off stitches, I'm just going right into the bind off and picking up stitches there. So I go in, yarn over, and then pull that out. I'm treating all of this edge as if they are stitches that would be on my left hand needle. And just, you don't have to be super careful or really accurate or anything like that. As long as it looks good, once they're all on your needle, that is all you need to care about. So I'm just going to go around and pick up all of the stitches I need. So you see, I'm picking up and knitting. See how those are putting them onto my circular needle? Go ahead and do the same. Once you get all of your stitches picked up all the way around on your circular needles, grab that stitch marker and pop it on there so that way you know where the start of your round is. Now we're going to go ahead and jump in to our knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. So I'm simply going to do knit 1, purl 1 all the way around. And I will do this for either 5 rounds, 6 rounds, or 7 rounds. Then I will go ahead and bind off. Once you've finished all the rounds of the ribbing, you can go ahead and bind off these stitches. You could bind off just by knitting all the way around, or you can bind off in pattern. The instructions want you to bind off in the rib pattern, so I'm going to show you how to do that. You will go ahead and work each stitch as they present themselves. So that's a knit, here's a purl, and have that back stitch jump the front. The next stitch is a knit, so I will knit. Have the back stitch jump the front. Next stitch is a purl, so I purl it, have the back stitch jump the front. This is what it means when you read in any sort of instructions to bind off in pattern. You simply maintain the pattern that you have established. Oops, I almost purled that one and it should be knit. Go ahead and continue on and bind off all of the ribbing around this section. When you get to the last stitch, go ahead and bind it off, cut your tail, and go ahead and pull that through. And you'll notice here you have a jag in the work. So I'm going to move my needles out of the way. What you need to do is go ahead, thread the tail that you just cut onto your bent tip tapestry needle, and come over here to the start where the first stitch you bound off and go underneath the stitch, underneath the V's, just like so. And what we're going to do is come back over here to the last stitch you bound off and go right down the center of it, okay? And pull back. What we're doing is we're closing this up just like we would if it were a normal stitch. We just want it to be somewhat invisible. So I'm going to come back underneath that V. I'm going to come back over here just to seam this up closed. Come back down the center, and I'm threading my needle down so that way I can bring it to the inside all the way down here to where I have this nice bulky seam to weave in my end. I mean, why waste time weaving in my end into the actual fabric when I have this nice big seam I can just tuck my end into. So once that's tucked in, give it a snip. I can get rid of that tail. I have this one over here. This was my beginning tail when I started the ribbing. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this at this time as well. Just make sure it's all woven in great. If you have any sort of opening down here, use your tails to close it, should you have one. So you can just do that. And once again, you can see I'm just going down this big old seam. I am not putting my needle through to the opposite side. So it's just kind of getting worked in there, and it will just be tucked away. Give that a snip. And here we are. So now, as I rotate this around, I have the neck opening, I have the full body with the trim all done. The only thing left to do are the leg holes. It's time to grab your double pointed needles and complete those leg openings. This is the last bit. You're almost done. It's time for the leg openings. We are on the home stretch. We are going to use our lovely double pointed needles and pick up stitches around the leg opening we created with waste yarn. This is a delicate process, but I'm telling you, if you take your time, you can get it. So let's go ahead and get started. I have finished one of the legs already, so it's time for me just to do this one over here. So let's do this together. All right, so I am positioning the sweater with my hand on the inside, and I am essentially just kind of spacing out this area that I'm going to be picking up stitches. I know that I have my waste yarn, which is that blue, worked into 11 pink stitches and 11 orange stitches. My goal now is to take my double pointed needles and working through each stitch that the blue yarn is working through, place those stitches on my double pointed needle. I can start here down here at the bottom and see that this yarn right here, this blue yarn, you can see here it is working through the left edge of this particular stitch. It's sort of a half stitch there, okay? It's really normal that's just the way knitting happens. So typically I put that stitch on my needle and I count that as the stitch that essentially I'm going to pick up on the side later. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up that stitch through the right leg. Now I'm going to go to the next stitch, and going through the right leg, I'm going to put my needle through that one. The next one through the right leg, needle through that one. And I'm going to do this all the way down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to do one more. Knowing that this one out here is one that typically wouldn't be counted as my 11, okay? So there's 6. Because I want to work in the round, I now want to grab another double point, and picking up where I left off, right here, I'm going to pick the right leg up and put it on the needle. Right leg and put it on the needle. And do this all the way down. Make sure you don't split the yarn. And you'll notice, see that blue yarn is just through one of the legs over there. So I'm going to put my needle through that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 6 stitches on each needle. Again, this stitch out here, typically you wouldn't pick up. That wouldn't be one of my 11, but I like to pick it up because I count it as one of the stitches that I would pick up later on the side, okay? So that's why I have 12. Now what I want to do is I want to do the same thing along that edge with the orange. So I go ahead and rotate the sweater. I'm going to put my hand on the inside, have those double pointed needles just hang out there. I'm going to have 2 on the bottom. And now working along the top here, working through the orange, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to, with this one here, I've got to find, I want to make sure I'm getting everything I want here. Let's see here. That stitch, there it is. I knew I had one. You see it? It's right there. So I'm going to pick up that one so I have the right leg. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. Do I see any more over here? So this one here, it's not through a half or anything. So I have 11 up top. So I have 12 on the bottom, 11 up top. Totally fine, perfectly normal. I'm going to count that one stitch I picked up over here. Let's see, can you see it? That stitch there that I picked up to start off with. I'm going to count that as one of the stitches on the side that I'm supposed to pick up and knit. And then when I come over here to this side, I will pick up and knit a stitch. So that way I get the 2 extra stitches. Now that I have all of those stitches picked up, I can go ahead and remove this waste yarn. So remember, I tied my waste yarn so that way it wouldn't come out easily. So I need to make sure I cut that tie. And now I'm going to use my spare needle and very gently just pick out that waste yarn. And if I have picked up all those stitches the way I was supposed to, I will not have any stitch fall loose. All of these stitches will now be on my needles. So just take your time with this. Pull the string out. Hopefully you haven't split the yarn in any way and don't have any issues. If you happen to split the yarn or have any issues, just use your scissors to cut the waste yarn, only the waste yarn, to get it out of the way because we don't want this waste yarn anymore. Okay? Get rid of this yarn. You can see here it comes out pretty easily, and because we've picked up all those stitches already and put them on the needle, we don't have to worry about dropped stitches. See, there you are. So now we have all of these on the needle. So this one over here would be the one that I'm counting as my side stitch. So I would just have to pick up one more on this side. And what will happen is, I could even do it right now if I wanted. I can look here and let's just see what would look good. To me, it would be this one would be the one I want to pick up. So I'm just going to put that on my needle and be done. So in the instructions, it says that we need to knit one entire round and pick up one stitch over here and one stitch over here. So instead of picking up those 1 stitches, I've already done that. So now I'm going to go ahead and grab my color A and knit one entire round. After I knit that 1 full round, I'll go into a knit 1, purl 1 ribbing for the number of rounds as listed on the pattern. Make sure that if you deviate in any way, you do mark down how many rounds you do because you want the 2 legs to match. All right, so let's go ahead. I will grab my color A and I will begin over here where we started off to pick up stitches, okay? And for me, I like to position all of my needles one on top of the other. It's just the way I like to do my double points. And I am using 3 double points because there's so few stitches here that I think that using the 3 double points and the 4th one as my spare is the best way to go about it. These are also pretty long double points. For something this small, I prefer shorter ones, but I didn't have any size 8 shorter needles, so we're going to go with these. I'm grabbing my yarn, and just like you would join anything else, I am going to begin knitting through these stitches. Make sure that you leave a nice long tail that you can weave in later. And this whole first round, I'm just going to knit. It's going to get all of those stitches just settled down now that we have them off of the scrap yarn. When you get through one needle, go ahead and position those stitches to the center, rotate counterclockwise, and then move to the next needle. We will knit all the way around this first round with our color A, and I'm not picking up any extra stitches again because I've already done that. If you find that your particular leg maybe has some bigger holes and you want to pick up more stitches, you can absolutely do that. This is your dog sweater. Just make sure that you have an even total number of stitches at the end, so that way you can do the knit one, purl one ribbing without any sort of issue. So I am going to come up to the end here. I'm just knitting away. And now that I've knit one full round, I'm ready to jump into my knit one, purl one ribbing. You'll notice I keep positioning the stitches to the center of my double point before I rotate. As I rotate and I pick up the next stitch, I do want to point out, so here's my tail. So I'm going to have a little bit of an opening gap right here. Pull perfectly fine, because I can use my tail later to seam anything that happens to be open there closed. I can just use duplicate stitch, so I'm not worried. But I will go ahead and jump in with my knit one and then purl one. Knit one, purl one. Pretty easy. And I'm going to do this all the way around on the double points for the designated number of rounds that is written in the pattern. Once you've reached the total number of rows you're supposed to do, again, remember, this can be seamed closed, so don't worry about any sort of opening there. You can go ahead and bind off in the ribbing pattern just like we did the bottom edging. So remember, you want to knit your knits and purl your purls, and then have the back stitch jump over the front stitch on the right hand needle. Whatever the next stitch is, work that stitch and jump off all the way around. At the end of this round, we will do that sort of invisible join to make it so that the jag isn't really bad, and then we will weave in our ends. When you bind off that last stitch, make sure you leave yourself a little length of tail, like a nice, I shouldn't say little, a nice length of tail. Pull that through. Use your tapestry needle to go ahead and thread that tail on. It is jagged, so come over here to the first bind off stitch, find it, so make sure I get the right one. All right, right there, is that it? I think it's the next one. All right, right there. Go through the two legs, come back up, and when it comes in, you're going to come over here to the last stitch you bound off and go down the center. Pull in, and you have a nice seamless join. Very invisible. You can go ahead then and weave in your tail on the inside of the leg. So for me, I like to just work down what would be the knits on the inside. I will actually just thread my yarn down the leg of them, like down one leg on one side. And then I will come up the opposite side. This is what I do when I work with ribbing. I think it's really easy to do this. And this is, of course, if I'm not burying my ends, which I kind of do right now too. I come back down the original one I went down, and I try and take my needle and work it through and break through the thread like I'm cutting through it, and just pull back down just to get it out of the way to make sure it's in place. Give that a snip. And then last but not least, we have this particular tail. This is the one we began with. And remember, I can use this one to do any sort of duplicate stitch if I want to close up any holes. So what I like to do is I will come up here and pull this snug, and I can see that this is kind of big. And I don't care that that's orange yarn. I'm actually going to duplicate stitch. So I'm going following this orange yarn, and I'm going to create a stitch and pull it in a little bit tighter. Can you see how that worked? So what this will do, and this works really great on mittens and gloves as well, but see how it's pulling in that stitch nice and snug. And it just makes it so that hole just went away. And I just did it with my yarn itself. Don't have to worry too much about it. Once it's to a point that I like, notice I did all that on the right side. I tuck the tail or the needle to the inside, pull it to the inside, and then I weave in my tail on the inside here. So just like you would any other knitting project, this one I'm kind of burying my tail into all of the extra bits that I have here because I have the duplicate stitch to hide pieces into. And once this is done, I'm going to have a nice leg right here to play around with. All right, so that's all woven in. I'm going to give that a snip. Come back out here. There are my two little legs. Oh my gosh, look how cute this is. So why don't I go ahead, go grab my dog, and let's try it on her. Lucy! Lucy! Come here, Lucy! Lucy! Oh my gosh, you guys, she is so adorable. This is Lucy. Lucy in her sweater. Let me see if I can put her down right here. Lucy. She's so scared. She has her sweater on. Look how cute it is. I have the area. She is shaking. Here's the area for the dog leash. And of course, it fits all the way down her body. Let me see if I can have her rub her tummy. Oh, girlfriend. She's like, Mom, no. Okay, let me just show him. Let me show him. Oh, let me show him up here. Oh, look how cute. It comes down. Oh, she is hiding. She's like, no, I'm good. I'm good. Oh, what do you think of the sweater, Lucy? I made it for you. I made it for you. All right. Well, if you were to ask me, this is Lucy approved. She is shaking because of all the lights over here. She's never been over here like this before. But this is so adorable. I hope you have enjoyed making your very own stylish knit dog sweater. I can't wait to see the ones that you make. If you make them, please share with me on social media. I'm just #MarleyBird pretty much anywhere. So if you do that, I'll be sure to come and smash your like button. All right, that's it for this video. Stay tuned and you can check out more videos right here on the MarleyBird YouTube channel. Bye. Say bye, Lucy. We'll say bye.